Everyone judged them at first glance, but no one saw the quiet promise, the shared loneliness, or the moment that made the whole world stop and rethink what love really looks like. The first time the world noticed us, it wasn't because of love. It was because of shock. I remember standing beside her in the grocery store aisle, the hum of the refrigerators filling the quiet between us. She was studying a jar of honey, turning it slowly in her hands as if the decision mattered deeply. Her hair was silver and neatly pinned back, a few soft strands escaping near her temple. There were lines on her face, real ones, earned through decades of laughter, loss, and endurance. When she finally chose the jar, she smiled, small and satisfied, like she'd solved a personal puzzle. That smile is what caught me. People noticed the age difference before they noticed anything else. Their eyes always did the math first. I felt it in the sideways glances, the pauses in conversation when we passed, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. I was used to being looked at, but standing next to her made those looks heavier, sharper. Still, she never flinched. Her posture stayed calm, dignified, as if she had already lived through bigger judgments than this, and won. We met in a place where no one expects a beginning. A quiet community center room, afternoon light spilling through wide windows, dust floating lazily in the air. I was there because I didn't know what to do with my free time. She was there because she believed time should never be wasted, no matter how much of it you've already lived. Our conversation started small. Polite. Safe. She spoke slowly, choosing her words with care, not because she was weak, but because she respected language. When she laughed, it wasn't loud, it was warm, like something remembered rather than discovered. Sometimes her hand would rest briefly on my forearm when she made a point, her touch light but steady. It wasn't the kind of touch that startled. It grounded. What surprised me wasn't her age. It was how seen I felt. She asked questions no one else did. Not what I wanted to become, but what I was afraid of losing. Not where I was going, but whether I was lonely getting there. When I spoke, she listened with her whole body, eyes focused, chin tilted slightly up, as if every word mattered. And somehow, with her, they did. I noticed the way her movements carried intention. Sitting down carefully, standing with patience, adjusting her sweater when the room grew cool. Life had slowed her body, but sharpened her presence. There was nothing rushed about her, and being near that calm made my own restless thoughts settle. I didn't fall in love all at once. It wasn't dramatic. It was quieter than that. It was the realization, one afternoon, that I trusted her. That I wanted to tell her things I hadn't said out loud before. That when she smiled at me across the table, the noise of the world faded just enough to make room for something honest. This wasn't the start of a scandal. It was the start of being understood, by someone who had lived long enough to know exactly what that was worth. After that first stretch of conversations, something shifted, softly, almost invisibly. It wasn't a moment you could point to and say, that's when it changed. It was more like realizing one day that the chair across from me felt empty when she wasn't there. We started sitting together on purpose. Same table. Same time. Afternoon light spilling through the windows, painting pale rectangles across the floor. She always arrived a few minutes early, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes drifting toward the door as if she sensed me before I stepped inside. When she saw me, her face would brighten just slightly, not exaggerated, not dramatic. Just enough to tell me I mattered. Our conversations grew longer. Deeper. The safe topics gave way to stories with weight. She spoke about her life in chapters, not complaints. About loving deeply once, about losing, about rebuilding a sense of self when the world expects you to quietly disappear. Her voice never shook, but sometimes her fingers tightened around the edge of the table, knuckles paling just a bit. In those moments, I felt an instinct to lean closer, to listen more carefully, as if attention itself could be a form of comfort. When I talked, I noticed myself slowing down. Choosing words. Not because she needed it, but because she deserved it. I told her about my uncertainty, the pressure to have everything figured out, the fear of becoming someone forgettable. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to reassure. She just listened, eyes steady, nodding gently, like she'd heard versions of this worry before, and survived them. Sometimes her hand would find mine without announcement. Just a light touch over my knuckles, warm and reassuring. It wasn't possessive. It didn't linger too long. But it carried something rare, permission to be honest without being judged. Each time it happened, my chest felt tighter, fuller, like something important was settling into place. I became aware of her presence in ways that surprised me. The faint scent of her perfume, clean, subtle, familiar. The way she adjusted her cardigan when she laughed. The lines around her eyes deepening when she smiled, evidence of a life that hadn't been easy, but had been fully lived. There was beauty there, not youthful, not polished, but real. Earned. Others noticed too. The looks became more curious, more pointed. Whispers followed us down hallways. I felt the weight of those stares pressing in, asking questions neither of us answered out loud. Once, I caught myself pulling my chair a little closer to hers, instinctively, protectively. She noticed, and placed her hand gently over mine, grounding me again. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just admiration. It was attachment. Not the reckless kind. The quiet kind that grows through shared silence, through trust built piece by piece. The kind that doesn't demand anything, but changes you anyway. I started looking forward to her stories the way people look forward to music they love. I replayed her words later, alone, hearing the calm certainty in her voice. And sometimes, when our eyes met and lingered a second too long, I felt a question forming between us, unspoken, unfinished. Neither of us said it yet. But we both felt it. Something was happening, something fragile, complicated, and unexpectedly meaningful. And whether the world was ready for it or not, neither of us could pretend anymore that this was just casual companionship. It was becoming something we'd have to face, together. It didn't take long for the world to press in around us. At first, the looks were easy to ignore. Curious glances. Lingering stares. The quiet recalculation people did when they saw us together. But as our closeness became more visible, those looks sharpened into something heavier, something that carried judgment instead of confusion. I felt it most when we walked side by side outside the community center. Bright afternoons, open sidewalks, nowhere to hide. Her pace was steady, measured, and I matched it without thinking. Sometimes our arms brushed, the lightest contact, and each time it happened my body reacted before my mind could. A subtle awareness. A warmth that spread and stayed. People noticed that too. I heard the whispers then, not always words, but tones. The pause in conversation as we passed. The raised eyebrows. Once, someone laughed quietly behind us, and the sound followed me longer than it should have. My instinct was to pull away, to create space, to protect both of us from becoming a spectacle. To discredit her, pity, manipulation, regret. They never found it. What they did find was composure. A calm confidence that didn't need defending. Still, there were moments when the pressure slipped through. One afternoon, we were sitting close on a bench, shoulders nearly touching. A group passed by, their laughter loud, careless. One of them glanced at us, then looked away too quickly. I felt my body tense, the instinct to create distance rising again. Before I could act on it, she leaned in slightly, her arm brushing mine. The contact was small, deliberate. "I'm here," she said quietly. That was all it took. The tension eased. Her presence had a way of reminding me why this mattered, not as a rebellion, not as a statement, but as a connection worth protecting. She opened up more during that time. About moments in her life when she'd chosen safety over happiness. About the cost of being practical for too long. She admitted she had learned how to be alone very well, but that being with me made her realize how much she had missed being truly seen. Listening to her, I felt a shift in myself too. A grounding. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore, not to her, not to anyone else. I just wanted to be steady. To show up. To let my actions speak louder than assumptions. There was a night when doubt almost won. A conversation with someone close left me questioning everything, my intentions, my future, whether love like this could survive constant scrutiny. I showed up the next day quieter than usual, thoughts heavy. She noticed immediately. Without saying a word, she reached for my hand and held it between both of hers. Her thumbs moved slowly, reassuringly, over my knuckles. The simple rhythm of that touch brought me back into my body, into the present. "You don't have to be fearless," she said softly. "Just honest." That became our unspoken agreement. Honesty over performance. Presence over explanation. We didn't owe the world a justification, but we owed each other care. In choosing to stay, we weren't denying the challenges. We were acknowledging them, and deciding they weren't enough to outweigh what we felt. Each step forward was intentional. Each moment of closeness earned. This wasn't about defying expectations. It was about choosing each other, again and again, even when it would have been easier not to. And in that choice, something quietly powerful began to take shape, resilience built not from defiance, but from devotion. By the time we reached this point, the connection between us had deepened into something undeniable. It wasn't just a bond formed from curiosity or comfort anymore, it had grown into an awareness that neither of us could ignore, no matter how carefully we tried to measure our steps. It happened one late afternoon, the kind of light that spills through windows and paints everything golden. We were sitting side by side on a low park wall, shoulders nearly touching, the warm breeze carrying the scent of early blooms. She laughed at something small I had said, a quiet, soft laugh that felt like sunlight spilling over my chest. Her hand brushed mine lightly as she adjusted her position, and I felt a subtle electric pulse, brief, but insistent. I realized then that it wasn't just comfort I felt in her presence anymore. It was anticipation. A careful, measured wanting that had built up over countless conversations, shared silences, and subtle touches. Every glance, every accidental brush of skin, every quiet word had been layering itself into this moment. And now, it was undeniable. She turned slightly toward me, her eyes catching the sunlight, long black hair glinting like silk. Her expression was soft, thoughtful, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed anyone to see. It struck me how much life experience she carried in those eyes, the quiet strength, the wisdom, the gentleness. There was something magnetic about it, something that made every thought I had feel more vivid, more present. We didn't speak at first. We just sat there, breathing in the same warm afternoon air, aware of each other in ways words couldn't capture. When she finally spoke, it wasn't a declaration. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, steady. "I like this," she said. "Being here. Like this." Her words weren't casual. They carried the weight of intention, of reflection, of care. And the way she said them made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. I wanted to reach for her, to close the space between us just a little more, to show her that I felt the same way, more than the words could say. I shifted slightly, careful not to startle her, and let my fingers graze hers. Her hand responded almost instinctively, tilting slightly to match mine. The warmth of her skin, the firmness beneath the softness, anchored me. In that small gesture, I felt the reality of us settle fully in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about what people might say. I wasn't worrying about judgment or appearances. There was only the quiet certainty that here, beside her, was a place I wanted to be. And it wasn't fleeting or uncertain. It was steady, intentional, and breathtaking in its simplicity. That day, everything felt real. Every glance, every touch, every heartbeat shared in silence was no longer an experiment or a tentative step, it was proof. Proof that something rare, something true, had grown between us. And as the sunlight faded into a soft, golden haze, I realized that no matter what challenges awaited, I was ready to embrace it fully, with her by my side. It wasn't the start of love, it was the confirmation that love had been quietly building all along. By the time we reached this point, the slow-burn connection we had nurtured over weeks of quiet moments and subtle touches had evolved into something undeniably real. The hesitations, the glances that lingered too long, the brushed hands, and the shared silences, all of it had led us here, to a place where the world's judgment no longer mattered as much as the truth of what we felt. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind that carries sunlight without heat, soft and warm, filling every corner of the small park where we often met. We had walked together without urgency, the familiar rhythm of our steps speaking more than words ever could. She wore a light blouse and a flowing skirt, her long black hair catching the sun in gentle streaks, revealing subtle highlights she hadn't bothered to hide. I noticed the small lines at the corners of her eyes, the laugh lines, the traces of wisdom, the elegance earned from years of living. We found a quiet spot beneath a maple tree, its leaves filtering light in dappled patterns across the ground. She sat down first, and I followed, leaving only a fraction of space between us. Our proximity was natural now, not calculated, an effortless acknowledgement that we belonged in the same frame. Her hand rested lightly on mine, palm warm against the back of my hand, fingers brushing in a rhythm that had become a language only we understood. We talked about ordinary things, books we wanted to read, small plans for the week, moments of gratitude, but beneath the surface, every word carried weight. Every glance, every subtle movement, was infused with a shared understanding that we had crossed a threshold. I realized I no longer worried about how others perceived us. The judgment of the world felt distant, almost irrelevant. What mattered was the quiet truth that we had chosen each other. There was a moment when she turned toward me, her eyes holding the softest intensity. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingertips lingering near my cheek for a heartbeat too long. I felt the warmth radiate, the pulse of her presence settling into mine. Her gaze was steady, filled with calm certainty. "I'm glad we found this," she said, her voice low and sincere. "Even when it was complicated, even when it was hard." I nodded, feeling the weight of all our unspoken fears, all the hesitant touches, all the quiet nights of wondering, lift gently. The path to this point had been slow, careful, and measured, and that deliberate pacing made it feel all the more precious. I reached for her hand, intertwining my fingers with hers, the gesture no longer tentative but deliberate. She squeezed gently, a silent promise, and I felt something shift, a quiet resolution, a sense of peace settling in both of us. Love had grown, not in reckless leaps, but in patience and understanding. As the sun climbed higher and bathed us in golden light, I realized that this quiet intimacy, this steady warmth, was what we had been building toward all along. There were no dramatic declarations, no need for validation, only the shared truth that we belonged together. In choosing each other, against whispers, doubts, and the cautious scrutiny of the world, we had discovered something rare, a love grounded in trust, patience, and the quiet joy of being seen. And in that moment, sitting side by side beneath the maple tree, it felt like the first day of forever. She felt the shift immediately. Her hand reached for my wrist, not tight, not demanding, just enough pressure to stop me. When I looked at her, her expression was calm, but her eyes searched my face with quiet concern. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't need to. Instead, she slid her hand down to rest against mine, fingers lightly touching, grounding me in a way words couldn't. "Breathe," she said softly. That was her gift, steadiness. She had lived long enough to know that judgment passes, but regret lingers. Still, I wasn't immune to doubt. Late at night, alone, I replayed moments in my head. Wondered what people thought. Wondered what they assumed about her. About me. About us. I was afraid, not of her, but of wanting more than the world would allow. There was a moment that made it impossible to ignore. We were sitting on a bench, sunlight filtering through the trees, shadows dancing across the pavement. She was telling a story from her past, her voice steady, but softer than usual. As she spoke, her hand rested on my knee, naturally, without hesitation. The warmth of her palm seeped through the fabric, sending a quiet jolt through me. When she realized what she'd done, she didn't pull away immediately. Instead, she looked at me, really looked at me. Her eyes held a question she didn't dare ask out loud. "Not yet." I swallowed hard, heart pounding. That single touch carried more weight than any confession. It was comfort. Trust. And something dangerously close to desire, not rushed, not careless, but real. I didn't move either. That silence stretched between us, fragile and charged. I became aware of my own hesitation, not because I didn't want her touch, but because I did. Wanting meant crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Wanting meant facing the world's reaction, and my own uncertainty about whether I was strong enough to withstand it. Eventually, she withdrew her hand, folding it back into her lap. Her posture remained composed, but something vulnerable flickered across her face, an old hurt resurfacing, perhaps. The fear of being misread. Of being dismissed. Of being wanted for the wrong reasons. That's when it hit me hardest. This wasn't just about my fear. It was about hers too. From that day on, every glance felt heavier. Every moment of closeness carried a question neither of us voiced. We were standing at the edge of something profound, held back not by lack of feeling, but by the weight of judgment, and the risk of wanting more than either of us had planned for. And still, despite everything, neither of us walked away. Because some connections are too honest to ignore, even when they scare you. The conversation didn't happen the way people imagine moments like this do. There was no dramatic setting, no raised voices, no sudden confession that spilled out all at once. It happened quietly, almost cautiously, because that was the only way it could. We were sitting across from each other again, the familiar table between us, afternoon light washing the room in a soft glow. Outside, life moved on as usual. Inside, everything felt suspended. She was stirring her tea slowly, watching the steam rise, her movements unhurried but deliberate. I could tell she was gathering something, words, courage, maybe both. When she finally looked up, her eyes held a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "I don't want to pretend anymore," she said. Her voice didn't tremble, but there was weight behind it. Honesty. Vulnerability. The kind that comes only after years of learning what happens when you stay silent too long. My chest tightened. I nodded, inviting her to continue, even though part of me already knew what she was going to say. She spoke about how careful she had been, how aware she was of how things looked. How she had tried to keep things measured, appropriate, contained. She admitted that it wasn't easy for her either. That she'd felt the shift just as clearly as I had. That some nights, she lay awake wondering if she was being selfish for wanting closeness, or foolish for hoping it might be something more. As she talked, her hand rested on the table, fingers relaxed but still. Without thinking, I reached across and placed my hand over hers. Not gripping. Not urgent. Just there. Her skin was warm, familiar, and when our hands connected, she exhaled softly, as if she'd been holding her breath longer than she realized. "I don't feel confused with you," she continued. "I feel clear. And that scares me." That was when I understood this wasn't about age or appearances or assumptions. It was about two people standing at different points in life, recognizing the same truth at the same time, and being afraid of what it demanded. I told her about my own doubts. About the fear of being judged, of being dismissed as naive, of being told I didn't understand what I was choosing. I admitted that I worried about hurting her, about becoming just another passing chapter in a life already full of them. Saying it out loud made my voice tighten, but she didn't look away. Instead, she squeezed my hand gently. "Just once. You don't feel temporary to me," she said. That sentence landed deeper than anything else. It carried trust. Risk. A quiet kind of faith that didn't ask for guarantees, only sincerity. I felt something settle in my chest then, a sense of responsibility, but also relief. Like finally stepping into a truth I'd been circling for weeks. We didn't label anything that day. We didn't make promises or plans. What we did was agree, to stop pretending. To acknowledge the connection without rushing it. To let it exist honestly, even if the world didn't understand it yet. When we stood to leave, she lingered for a moment. Her hand brushed my arm, fingers resting there just a second longer than necessary. She looked up at me, her expression soft but resolute. Whatever this was, it wasn't accidental anymore. It was chosen. And from that moment on, everything between us felt different, not louder or more intense, but steadier. More real. As if we had crossed an invisible line, not into recklessness, but into truth. The world hadn't changed. But we had. Once the truth was spoken between us, it became impossible to go back to the way things were. Not because everything suddenly felt easy, but because pretending felt heavier than facing whatever came next. We started spending time together outside the places that had first brought us close. Walks in the early afternoon, when the sun was high and the streets were alive. Quiet cafes where conversations hummed softly around us. We didn't hide, but we didn't perform either. We simply existed side by side, letting the world see what it wanted to see. That visibility came with consequences. Friends asked questions that sounded like concern but felt like doubt. Strangers stared a little longer than necessary. Sometimes I caught people watching her face, as if searching for a reason.